Welcome to Flexiture, where history, science, and pop culture collide. The American Civil War, a story of blood, bravery, and tragedy, the seeds of division, a nation at the crossroads, 1830s, 1850s. The United States, a country born from the ideals of liberty and freedom, stood at the precipice of destruction by the mid-1800s. While the North industrialized at an astonishing pace, with its steel mills, factories, and growing urban cities, the South remained rooted in its agricultural traditions. The South's economy was built upon vast plantations, where endless fields of cotton and tobacco flourished under the labor of enslaved African Americans. The tension between these two distinct regions was palpable, but it was slavery, the very institution that powered the Southern economy, that was at the heart of the division. To the North, slavery was an archaic, inhumane institution that violated the moral foundations of the country. To the South, it was not just an economic necessity but a way of life, tied to the survival of their social order. As the nation expanded westward, the question loomed, would new territories be free or slave states? This question was not just about politics, it was about the future of the country. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 had attempted to keep the peace by drawing a line between free and slave territories, but this fragile agreement was shattered as the country grew. The Compromise of 1850 tried again to balance these interests, but it was clear that the wounds were only deepening. The Fugitive Slave Act, which required the return of runaway slaves, incited fury in the North. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which allowed the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether they would allow slavery, led to brutal violence between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces in what became known as Bleeding Kansas. The ideal of a united nation was being torn apart at the seams, and the Civil War that many feared seemed imminent. The spark: Abraham Lincoln's election and secession, 1860. The election of 1860 brought the conflict to a head. Abraham Lincoln, a man born in the frontier cabins of Kentucky, rose to prominence as a lawyer and politician, known for his eloquent speeches and firm stance against the spread of slavery. In an election that split the nation, Lincoln, a member of the new Republican Party, won the presidency, carrying only the northern states. The South, feeling betrayed by the election of a man they saw as hostile to their way of life, erupted in outrage. South Carolina was the first to secede on December 20, 1860. Like a ripple spreading across a pond, one state after another followed. By February 1861, 7 southern states had formed the Confederate States of America, a new nation, claiming that they were leaving the Union to preserve their way of life and their right to own slaves. Lincoln, who had no intention of seeing the Union torn apart, declared that he would do everything in his power to preserve the nation. But the Confederate States were resolute in their belief that they had a right to secede, and war seemed inevitable. The beginning of the war, Fort Sumter, April 1861. On April 12, 1861, the first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The fort was a symbol of Union power within the Confederacy's territory, and the Confederacy, under the command of Brigadier General P.G.T. Beauregard, sought to capture it. The Union garrison, commanded by Major Robert Anderson, was surrounded, outnumbered, and under constant fire. For 34 hours, the Confederate forces bombarded the fort, sending explosions across the bay as the Union soldiers attempted to defend their position. As the sun set on April 13th, Anderson was forced to surrender, marking the Confederacy's first victory of the war. The Union, however, was not crushed. Instead, the attack on Fort Sumter ignited the resolve of the northern states. Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, and for the first time in American history, a nation stood on the precipice of a war that would decide its fate. Early struggles, Bull Run and the harsh realities of war. July 1861. The first significant land battle took place on July 21, 1861, at First Bull Run, also known as Manassas in the south. Union forces under General Irvin McDowell marched toward the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, hoping to crush the rebellion in a single, decisive battle. The Union soldiers, many of whom had never seen combat, were eager to prove their strength. But the Confederacy, led by General Pierre G.T. Beauregard and General Joseph E. Johnston, was waiting. The Confederates were not only fighting to preserve their homeland, but also for their very survival. The Union Army, though superior in numbers, was overwhelmed by the intensity of the Confederate resistance. The battle was chaotic, a wild dance of gunfire, smoke, and confusion. The Union forces, once in a strong position, were pushed back by a fierce counterattack. The retreat turned into a rout, with Union soldiers fleeing in panic, leaving behind their equipment and artillery. The Confederacy, though victorious, could not afford to press its advantage. The North, however, was shaken to its core by the unexpected loss. First Bull Run shattered any illusions of a quick, easy victory, and both sides realized that the war would not be over soon. The war in the West, Shiloh, Vicksburg, and the battle for the Mississippi, 1862 to 1863. While the Eastern theater of the war grabbed most of the headlines, the struggle in the West was just as crucial. By early 1862, Union General Ulysses S. Grant was making his mark in the Western theater. After victories at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee, Grant's army advanced toward the heavily fortified Confederate stronghold of Shiloh, near the Mississippi River. On April the 6th to the 7th, 1862, the battle erupted with tremendous ferocity. The Confederacy, under General Albert Sidney Johnston and General P.G.T. Beauregard, launched a surprise attack on Grant's forces. The Union soldiers, caught off guard, were driven back, but not defeated. The battle turned into a brutal, bloody stalemate, with thousands of men falling in the mud and the smell of death and gunpowder filling the air. By the end of the second day, Union reinforcements arrived, and the Confederates were forced to retreat. The casualty count at Shiloh was staggering, over 23,000 men dead, wounded, or missing. The war, which had once seemed distant and romanticized, now revealed its true horrors. Meanwhile, Grant turned his attention to the strategic Mississippi River, aiming to cut the Confederacy in two. In May 1863, after a months-long siege, Grant's forces captured the city of Vicksburg, Mississippi. This victory gave the Union control of the river and split the Confederacy, giving the Union a decisive strategic advantage. Gettysburg, the turning point, July 1863. The summer of 1863 saw the Confederate Army, under General Robert E. Lee, venture into the North once again. After his victory at Chancellorsville, Lee believed that a decisive battle on Union soil would turn the tide of the war in the Confederacy's favor. The two armies met at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, on July 1, 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg unfolded over 3 days, from July 1st to July 3rd, in a landscape marred by violent fighting. The Union Army, under General George G. Meade, fought with everything they had, using the terrain to their advantage. The Confederates, led by Lee, attacked relentlessly, hoping to break through the Union lines. The most infamous moment of the battle came on July 3rd, when General George Pickett led a direct assault on the Union center, Pickett's Charge. Thousands of Confederate soldiers, their faces set in grim determination, marched across open fields under a hail of Union fire. The charge was annihilated, and Pickett's men were slaughtered. By the end of the battle, the Confederacy had suffered over 28,000 casualties. Lee, defeated, was forced to retreat. Gettysburg marked the turning point of the war. The Confederacy, once filled with hope, now faced the inevitability of defeat. The Union, emboldened by their victory, began to push forward, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. The final year, Sherman's march to the sea and Lee's surrender, 1864 to 1865. The war in the South intensified in 1864. General William Tecumseh Sherman, a ruthless strategist, launched his famous March to the Sea, a campaign of total war aimed at breaking the South's will to fight. Sherman's troops marched from Atlanta to Savannah, leaving a path of destruction in their wake. They burned crops, tore up railroads, and devastated everything in their path, leaving the South in ruin. Meanwhile, in the East, General Grant relentlessly pursued General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. After the bloody battles of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor, Lee's army was on the brink of collapse. Grant's strategy was simple: keep the pressure on, wear down Lee's forces, and force him to surrender. On April 9, 1865, after months of punishing fighting, Lee finally surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The Confederate army, shattered and broken, laid down their arms. The war was over. The aftermath, Reconstruction, and a nation forever changed. The Civil War left the nation scarred. Over 600,000 Americans, both soldiers and civilians, had died. The South lay in ruins, its economy shattered, its social fabric torn apart. The abolition of slavery, a profound moral victory, left millions of African Americans free, but the struggle for equality and justice was far from over. Lincoln's assassination on April 14, 1865, just days after the war's end, cast a shadow over the Union's victory. The Reconstruction era that followed sought to rebuild the South and reunite the nation, but it was a time of great conflict and division. The effects of the war would reverberate throughout the nation's history, leaving a legacy of courage, loss, and transformation.